Changes are planned to domestic violence laws, so will they give victims the protection they need? Good evening. Last week's Queen's speech was shorter than normal after the Conservatives failed to secure a majority at the general election, but it did include a promise to introduce new measures on domestic violence, as Neil Perry explains.
Amongst the pomp and circumstance of the Queen's speech, the potential of more hope for domestic violence campaigners.
Legislation will be brought forward to protect the victims of domestic violence and abuse.
As Her Majesty announced the new government's programme in this famous old chamber, she announced details of a draft domestic violence and abuse bill that's including plans for tougher sentences for domestic abusers whose crimes have a devastating impact on children. She also discussed setting up a domestic violence and abuse commissioner to monitor the response of statutory agencies and local authorities and hold the justice system to account, as well as creating a new domestic abuse civil prevention and protection order regime. All could be steps in the right direction, but do they go far enough? And what else can be done to stop a crime that affects so many?
Well, here to talk about that is Rhys Lloyd from the charity Leeway. Also with us, Zoe Harding, who's a domestic abuse change coordinator for the County Council and the Police and Crime Commissioner, and Lorraine Saunders from support group Dawn's New Horizon. So let's just get your reaction to those plans in the Queen's speech. A good thing, a bad thing? Have you got any concerns about it?
I'd say probably overall it's a good step in the right direction, really, and I think it's really, first of all, it's really important that it was raised as a key talking point in the Queen's speech. I think it's an issue that so often perhaps people don't like to talk about because of the nature of it, and I think because it's being brought forward, it's definitely a positive thing. So that would be my initial reaction. Probably I'd say, whilst there's some good things outlined, there are still probably other areas which could be improved. But I think generally it's a good starting point.
We'll talk some more about that a bit later. Zoe, what was your initial reaction?
I would reiterate what Rhys is saying. It's really good to see that is key up on their issues. It's often, as you say, it's something that's not really talked about as much as it should be. So I'm pleased to see that there are some things that come out. It'll be interesting to see what they look like. Particularly interested in the legislation around offences that have an impact on children. I think quite often the impact on children can be minimised, or it's not often seen, and it's really really important to make people aware of that.
Okay, well let's ask Lorraine. I mean, have you got any concerns? Are you pleased it's in the Queen's speech?
Very much. I'm very pleased. As they've both said, it's something that needs to be addressed. It's something that's not talked about enough. And having children myself who had gone through domestic abuse and seen it from their angle, I wasn't aware of the implications it had on children, and I'm very happy that this has come about and lots more to be done. Okay,
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, would you tell us a little bit about your story? Because you've been through this, haven't you?
I have been through, and I've come out the other end as well. My daughter was very young at the time. We left when she was 12 years old, and I did lots of talks on domestic abuse and what she saw, but from her point of view and my point of view it wasn't the same. I thought, to be honest, that she was safe. She wasn't aware of what was going on because I had shut the door, put the music on, put her to bed. I thought she couldn't see, she couldn't hear, but she did. I learned later on in life, when we did the TV, when we went on TV and we did the talks, she said to me, I did know, Mum, and I did hear it, and the effect it had on her was quite horrific, to be honest.
And does that echo the kind of stories that you're hearing at Leeway and in your work, those sort of horrific impact on children and the whole family, really?
Yes, definitely. I think it's not just an impact on the person who is going through the abuse. I think it's a much wider kind of circle than that. And the impact it has on children is quite big, because obviously at that stage in their lives they will be finding their own feet, they'll be maturing, and obviously to go through something like that, which obviously it splits up families, it's very upsetting for them.
A lot of people don't realise, sorry cutting in there, that it's not real. They think it's the normal. You know, she said to me, at the time I thought it was normal, every family did that. It wasn't until she went to a friend's house that there was no fighting, there was no arguing, and he didn't hit her. Until, you know, I got up in the morning and the mother didn't have a black eye. She wasn't crying, she wasn't upset.
And how are we doing in Norfolk at the moment? I mean, can we compare ourselves to other parts of the UK and get a feel for how bad it is or how good it is here?
My understanding is that we're quite positive, we're quite good at responding to domestic abuse in Norfolk. We've got one of the best systems in terms of the MASH, and there's some really good training going on. There's really good services. It's not ideal. We know that there's lots of gaps in the services. We know that there's certain areas of the county that don't have the same support. I don't know what your views are, but it seems sometimes it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Depends on where you live, depends on what service you get. But we're really passionate about what we're doing. Everyone that's involved in domestic abuse is really passionate about what we're doing. And I was just thinking, you know, talking about the impact on the children, that's something that's very passionate. I'm very passionate about. You obviously Leeway work directly with children, don't they?
Yes, we do.
But so are there? I mean, you mentioned gaps. Are there gaps? Where are the gaps that we're seeing in the services at the moment?
I would say in North Norfolk, there's really limited services in terms of domestic abuse. The West, where one of the areas where I'm based, there's actually some new services that have come in there. So that was one of the areas that wasn't particularly well covered. Now has some more services in there. But there's different services across the whole of the counties. There's some that will work with male and female victims. There's some that will work with children. There's some that will work with one of the key gaps is actually perpetrator programs.
Yes, very. That is really hard. I have people contact me and say, you know, this is what I'm doing. I know it's domestic violence. Please help me. Where do I go? You know, and it's really hard for me to find a place to send them because they don't want to do what they're doing. And all I get back is, well, they haven't offended that much and they've got to be on a different level. I'm like, but they know what they're doing. Please help them. And it's very, very hard to get them, you know, help.
Okay, all right. Well, here in Norfolk, the case of Kerry McCauley has shocked many people who heard about it. The 32-year-old suffered 19 separate injuries to her face, including fractured cheekbone and jaw, in what prosecutors described as a brutal, vicious and sustained attack. Joe Story was convicted of murdering Kerry in June. And Lauren Du Bois has this report from the day of the sentencing.
We have many wonderful memories of our time with Kerry. Sadly, they are now tainted by thoughts of her suffering in the final moments of her life at the hands of a monster, as he repeatedly rained the most severe of blows to her head, resulting in every bone in her face being broken like a jigsaw.
Just some of the harrowing details of the murder of mum of two, Kerry McCauley, that her family have been forced to relive as the man who beat her to death stood trial. And today, as the judge jailed 27-year-old Joe Story from Murrells Court for life with a minimum of 24 years, there were tears from her heartbroken loved ones. Their message, no sentence will ever be enough. During today's hearing, the judge described what he called Story's appalling history for attacking women, with 4 previous convictions against ex-partners for which he'd been given restraining orders and time in prison.
There should never be a first time. If there is, it most definitely should be the last time. We call on the Homicide Review Team to incorporate an investigation into the clearly ineffective rehabilitation of this monster, whilst recently serving a sentence for domestic violence against another poor woman.
What I can say is I'm confident in relation to this case with Kerry, that the police, the agencies, family and friends did everything they could to support Kerry, and we will never know what drew Kerry towards Joe Story, whether it was misguided loyalty, love, or whether it was through fear. But certainly Kerry had the support of family and friends in this case. But there will be a domestic homicide review, and we will look at all of those cases to see what more, if anything, could have been done.
DCI Marie James there from Norfolk Police. I mean, Lorraine, there were some really disturbing details in that case, but do you think when we hear about things like that, it makes more people come forward?
It does make people come forward. It's highlighted, and people say, oh, that's me. Sometimes people don't realise it's domestic abuse. I've had people come to me and said, he only do this, or she only does that, but it's abuse.
They minimise, don't they, the emotional abuse, and people often focus on the physical violence, don't they?
Yeah.
And say, oh yeah, they, maybe they don't call me, they don't treat me properly, or they don't treat me with respect, but they're not hitting me, so it's okay. So it's often really minimised, isn't it?
And what stops people kind of getting out of that situation? Why? I mean, people, I guess the obvious question is, why not just leave?
It doesn't work like that, does it? It doesn't work like that. People would say that to me, why don't you just leave? Because I was in a situation at the time, I didn't understand it was domestic abuse. I knew that because he was raping me and hitting me, I knew that it was wrong, but I didn't think it was domestic violence. I thought, well, to be honest, I was so young that him doing them things was normal. I honestly thought it was normal. And it wasn't until I went and got help for a different thing that they said to me, Lorraine, this is not okay. He can't do this to you. And when people come to me and say, he's only just calling me names, he's just calling me horrible names, I think it's abuse, you can't do that. And then it leads from there to something else, doesn't it?
And just a quick word, Rhys, is that something that charities need to do more with, to helping people to stop it before it gets that serious?
Yes, definitely. I think it's probably more, speaking more generally, it's probably about raising awareness of domestic abuse and what it entails. So whether that's through something such as training, training health professionals, businesses, and going into schools as well, because obviously sometimes if an incident's going on at home, it may have an impact on the child's behaviour in school, which a teacher may just perceive as them not being interested in learning, or say them not behaving in the manner they'd expect. So I think perhaps a greater understanding is generally needed of what it entails, because I still think there is the misconception that it's all about the physical injuries that you can see.
I'm sorry to stop you, we must have a break, but we will come back after the break and talk more about some of those solutions. So do stay with us, and after the break we will be talking more about what can be done to support victims of domestic violence in Norfolk. Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about domestic violence after the government announced new plans for legislation to support victims and introduce stricter penalties for attackers. On the panel this evening, Rhys Lloyd from the charity Leeway and Zoe Harding, who's a domestic abuse change coordinator for the County Council and the Police and Crime Commissioner. Also with us, Lorraine Saunders from the support group Dawn's New Horizons. So we talked about some of the problems. Let's talk about some of the solutions. One of the things the government's proposing is sentences which reflect the devastating lifelong impact abuse can have on a child. So stronger penalties, I'm guessing. Is that a deterrent, do you think?
For some people, sadly, it's not going to be a deterrent. Although those that we are able to prosecute, then obviously it does mean that it offers better protection to the victim and the children. One of the things I would like to be would be interested to find out about is what that's going to look like in terms of is that going to be a package? Because one of the things we know is often people don't actually report to the police. So actually getting to a stage where they go through the court process is a challenge in itself. So we need to be able to get them there to then have these harsher penalties put into place.
And what about stronger penalties? Do you think they work?
Sometimes, and they do not reoffend, but other times, no. They just get a slap on the wrist and said, don't do it again.
Depends, doesn't it, on them, whether there's rehabilitation involved within that sentence, whether there's programmes that are offered to them.
But they don't always work either. I've had people come to me and they've gone on a programme and they've said to me, I got put on a programme and all I'd done was sat there and talked to them for 10 minutes, done a test, and I didn't see anybody after that. I wanted to have counsellor, I wanted to talk to somebody, and there was nobody there. And I'm like, why isn't there somebody there, you know? So things do need to be done. Yes, there are bigger sentences that need to be, but there are also things that need to be put in place for people who need help and support. Do you not agree?
Could be drugs and alcohol, mental health support, like say counselling, and that ongoing rather than just going through a programme and then, you know, it needs to have that follow-up.
What would you like to see put in place?
Well, on the subject of sort of specialist needs. Recently, Leeway was actually lucky enough to receive funding to be able to employ specialist caseworkers. So they'll provide ongoing support to people with those issues, which is so important because so often it's not just the abuse, it's the other things that go with it that they need support for. And just touching on the issue of tougher sentencing, I think it may have the impact that it actually encourages more people to come forward because they think, oh, it's being taken seriously, which perhaps if they thought that domestic abuse wasn't necessarily an issue that was taken seriously before, they might think, well, what's the point in coming forward? Whereas I think perhaps tougher sentences, it makes people think, oh, I'll be taken seriously if I come forward, which that's one way I think of looking at it.
Okay, all right. Well, let's take a look at one idea that's being tried out in Norwich at the moment to help victims come forward via their hairdresser. Lauren Du Bois has the details.
Whether it's a quick trim or a 3-hour wash, cut and colour, a trip to the hairdressers normally includes a good natter. With some of us sharing details of our lives, we might not even tell our closest friends. And now that unique trusting relationship is being put to another use here at Bow Hair and Beauty in Norwich, where stylists are going to receive training in spotting the signs of domestic abuse. The idea was sparked by a new law over in America. Hairdressers in Illinois are now legally required to be trained in domestic abuse awareness. Rachel Buck owns Bow Hair and Beauty but used to work for Norfolk charity Leeway, which advises and supports victims. When she heard about the scheme, she decided to combine her two areas of expertise.
They've identified not only the relationship that a client and a hairdresser actually build, which is a very unusual and unique relationship, I would say, in the amount of trust that is given to the hairdresser with the most intimate details of someone's life, but it's actually also about the physical space that somebody has. Perpetrators of abuse tend to follow their people around who they commit abuse to and make sure that they can't tell anyone and isolate them from people, their friends and their family. The salon environment actually gives people a chance to be physically away from the perpetrator, and actually that makes the salon a very safe space for someone.
Okay, a small idea there, but is it a good one? Does it work?
Very good idea.
Definitely.
Why is it a good idea?
It's been run in other parts of the country and it's really successful because, as we know, as it says on there, hairdressers hear all sorts of things. And I've spoken to hairdressers about this and they say, we get all sorts of conversations going on.
It really surprised me though when I saw that.
Yeah, it works. It does work. That is one of the places that you're allowed to go, if you like, and you're allowed to just sit there. Sometimes they can see you from the window if they follow you, but they don't know what you're talking about. You know, as people come into my shop and they're allowed to come in, but they can't see what they're doing. You know, again, if they were to go to the hospital, because they get escorted to the hospital and then they talk to you, they would have somebody standing there, a doctor or someone like that. So someone like that, the hairdresser, is absolutely fantastic. It's a great idea. I think it'll work.
A lot of hairdressers also say that they want to be able to support someone. They don't quite know what to say to them when someone discloses something like that. So having those skills to be able to do that.
And we've also got domestic abuse champions in Norfolk. What do they do?
Yes, we have. So we've got multi-agency professionals across the whole of Norfolk. We've got about 700 at the moment.
So
and they
like health visitors,
school nurses, some GPs, support staff in schools, citizens advice bureaus, children's centre, numerous organisations.
And what's their role?
They are the key person within their team, so they are the champion within their team for domestic abuse. They come, they do a really comprehensive 2-day training. They then have regular network events. They have consultations when they've got difficult cases. They can get advice from us about how they can proceed with those. They get ongoing support from us. They have monthly newsletters. So it's not just a training thing, it's more of a kind of
ongoing,
an ongoing support package that they have access to.
And one of my ladies who works with myself, she is a champion as well, and she says she goes on that and she's learnt so much. So that proves that it's working, doesn't it?
Okay, well, guiding people who are suffering with domestic abuse problems to the right kind of support, as we saw, is being tried in those hair salons. But could employers do more? Let's hear from Helen Burrows, who's a trainer at Leeway.
people who work one-to-one with people, but also very much across the business community. We know that 1 in 10 employees is someone experiencing domestic abuse. So there's a really high number of people that, if businesses know how to respond, can talk to their staff to give their staff that kind of awareness training, then we'd be delighted to be part of that.
So support for businesses, I mean, is that something you're really championing now at Leeway?
Yes, definitely. I think it's, as the statistics say, businesses have a massive role to play in this, and I think because of the intimate relationships sometimes you kind of have with colleagues, you form close bonds, and maybe you discuss things in your life. That kind of makes it ideal. It's an ideal situation to be able to, if they can spot the signs, be able to point you in the right direction of support.
Difficult talking about something like this at work, though, surely.
It shouldn't be, though, that's the thing. It's about making people aware. It's a community responsibility. It's not just those specialist organisations. We all have a duty to support and protect people, and there is so much stuff that employees can put into place to support.
What sort of things?
Know what they are, don't they?
What sort of things would you like to see put in place?
Flexible working, counselling support, access to certain services, sometimes surgeries and workshops within actual businesses as well, sort of holistic workshops that help people.
And make time for the person who's coming to you. Sometimes we haven't got time, we haven't got time to talk to you, or they don't understand, and they haven't got the skills to actually understand what domestic abuse is.
We know how disempowering domestic abuse is, so actually just giving some of the time, making them feel valued and supported as a member of staff.
Because they don't always go in with cuts and bruises, do they? It's sometimes mental, and just to have somebody to talk to. Can I just have just 2 minutes of your time? And you're like, I just needed to tell somebody. That's all we need.
We assume a lot of the time it's just women, though, but the Office for National Statistics says it's about a quarter men.
Yes.
Is that a surprise?
Yeah, well...
And do we need to support men differently, I suppose?
It's not surprising, is it? But
no, domestic abuse can affect anyone regardless of age, race, gender, sexuality. So I think it's about really being inclusive with the support and making sure that people aren't turned away because they think,
there's like a stigma around it, though, isn't it? It's men, or they shouldn't have to do this. But when I get men, come to me and ask me for help, I don't want anyone to see, well, can I tell you this, but don't say anything. And they're really big blokes who come to me and say, but my wife was only really little, and people are going to laugh at me. That's not how it should be, is it?
Yeah, I think certainly with the regards to that, it almost kind of needs to be an approach that we're kind of seeing almost with mental health at the minute, whereas there seems to be quite a lot of... I think the boundaries have been kind of broken with that, and people feel a lot more comfortable about coming out and saying, look, I'm going through this. And I think that's almost what we need with domestic abuse. You need people, regardless of their gender or anything like that, they need to feel, I can talk about it.
Get that support.
We're almost out of support when they actually do disclose.
We're almost out of time. So just tell me, what one thing would you like to see change from all of you? Start with Lorraine.
One thing I would like is tougher sentences, and people, when they come forward, to actually be listened to. I would like that.
Okay, what would you like to see change, Zoe?
More support when someone does disclose around that whole criminal process, and for children as well.
Okay, what would you like to see change?
I would agree with the support, and I would also say greater funding for services for domestic abuse.
Yes, definitely. Okay, and that's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, in our current climate, there's never enough money to go around. Okay, all right, thank you all. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you to all my guests for taking part. If you've been affected by any of the issues we've been talking about and you're looking for local sources of support, you can contact the Leeway charity or Dawn's New Horizon, and those website addresses are on your screen now. But until next time, good night.